4 armed thieves broke into an Argentine bank and seized the assets. The police surrounded the place, and after several hours of negotiation, the thieves announced that they would surrender themselves, provided that the police would bring them a pizza. The pizza arrived, but the thieves suddenly cut off all communication channels with the police. The police decided to break into the bank, but inside the bank, there was no one but the assets. When they went down, they found that the bank safe was destroyed. There was no trace of the thieves, nor any trace of the way they escaped. They didn't find a hole in the ground, nor any exit they could get out of. The police immediately headed to the tenants. They suspected that the thieves were hiding among them. So, do you really think that the thieves were hiding among the tenants? Where did they go exactly? That's what we're going to find out in today's story. In 2006, the largest bank robbery in Argentina was carried out. It was a complicated and smart operation. There were 4 thieves who carried out this operation. The first was the leader of the operation. His name was Fernando Araujo. The second was the engineer of the operation. His name was Sebastian Bolster. The third was Beto de la Torre, and we will give him the nickname of the financier. The fourth was Luis Salinas, and we will give him the nickname of the violent. There were also 2 people who helped them, but from the outside. These 2 people's identities were not revealed. The first was the doctor's nickname, and the second was the boy's nickname. So, I want you to put these 4 names in your mind, and I gave each of them a nickname to make it easy for you to remember them. So, the story begins with Fernando, the leader and the head of the operation. This man went to a psychiatrist one day and told him, "I want to rob a bank." The doctor was surprised and thought he was talking because of the effect of drugs. Because Fernando was always smoking and giving drugs, he said to the doctor, "Well, where did you get this desire? For money? Do you want money?" So, Fernando replied to him, "No, I don't need money. But you know me, I'm an artist and I love art. And I feel that I can make a great artistic work in the field of bank robberies." The doctor said, "Okay, and how do you intend to carry out this operation?" So, Fernando replied to him, "I don't know yet, but this subject is in my mind and body. I think about it before I sleep, after I wake up, and at every moment of my day. I want to rob a bank." So, the doctor at the time did not give much consideration to his words, and he felt that the drugs was the one who was talking. But Fernando really intended to rob a bank, and he will carry out the smartest and largest bank robbery operation in the history of Argentina. At that time, Fernando used to go out every day, and he would walk around the streets of the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires, to explore the possible objectives of the operation. And he really got a bank called Banco Rio, one of the well-known banks in a very rich area, a bank where the rich put their wealth, money, and precious things. After that, Fernando was thinking about the ways in which he could carry out the operation. The first way is when the bank is open. They enter the bank with their weapons, and they take the money from the robbers. And they leave quickly before the police blockade the place. But this method, the problem is that it is very dangerous, and even its profits are few, because they won't have time to go to the treasury and steal what's in it. They have to leave quickly, before the police arrive. The second way is to break into the bank when it is closed. And this method usually requires digging a hole under the ground to lead them to the treasury. But this method, the problem is that it can be discovered quickly, because the bank has thermal sensors and advanced warning devices. You can immediately discover if someone has entered the treasury while it is closed. So both ways are difficult and dangerous. So Fernando thought that if he was to risk everything, he should at least get the biggest profit, which means that he will implement the second way. He will dig a hole and enter the treasury while the bank is closed. So he started to think about how he could dig a hole. At first, he thought of renting a flat or a warehouse near the bank, and he would dig a hole to get the treasury from underground. But in the end, Fernando will get a nice surprise. He will shorten all this work for him. One day, while he was doing his exploratory tours, he noticed the holes in the treasury that are located along the street in front of the bank. Every 10 meters, there was a hole in the treasury, which means that there is already a tunnel under the ground that passes in front of the bank, the tunnel of the treasury. So Fernando kept following these holes along the street until he reached the treasury. This treasury was a big hole. It was only 150 meters away from the bank, which means that the man got a ready hole. So Fernando immediately entered this hole and started to explore it. At first, the hole was square, but after he walked about 100 meters, he reached a round hole that was about 6 meters long, which means that it was a huge hole that extends under the city and passes directly in front of the bank. Now Fernando needed someone to help him because he couldn't do this alone. So the first person he thought of was one of his friends. His name was Sebastian Bolster, which we called him the engineer, because this man was an expert in electronics and mechanics. So when he went to Fernando and showed him the idea, Sebastian was surprised. Because according to what he knew, Fernando didn't have a criminal history or experience in theft or anything like that. All he knew was that one loves art and grass. So how could someone like this steal a bank? But Fernando started to tell him the details and the idea that he had in mind, and how they could reach the treasury through the underground tunnel. Sebastian started to think seriously about it. Although he didn't steal anything in his life and never thought of entering this field, his past with the banks was tragic. His father and grandfather were all severely harmed when the banking system collapsed a while ago in Argentina, and they lost a lot of their savings and money, and no one gave them back their rights. So Sebastian started to think about it, as if this was a stolen right. Banks are the evil side of the equation, and if he stole from the bank, he would never have done anything immoral, at least from his point of view. So the engineer Sebastian told the leader Fernando that he was with him in the operation. So now they went to the underground tunnel and started to do the calculations together, to find out where they were going to dig. First of all, Fernando went and brought a measuring tape and started to put it in the underground tunnels. This tape would help them so that when they enter the tunnel, they would know exactly where they are and how far they are from the surface. And then they went inside the bank and took some hidden photos. And they invited new customers and went down to the bank vault, which is in the basement, to see it. So they knew how big it is and how many safe boxes it has. There were hundreds of safe boxes. But even with all the calculations they did, everything remained accurate. They didn't have accurate numbers. And to get these accurate numbers, they had to get the bank's building plans, which are usually found in the municipality. So they felt like they needed help from people who had experience in the world of theft. And they also needed financial support because the tools Sebastian was going to make would need money. So here, Fernando, the leader, started looking for a new partner to join them. So he contacted a person they call the doctor. This person never revealed his identity and was playing the role of the copy more than being a part of the operation. The doctor told Fernando that he's going to contact the right people to help them in the operation. The first person was Beto de la Torre. We called him the sponsor. Beto was an experienced person and a gang member. Although he didn't have direct experience in theft, he had experience in the world of weapons. So the leader, Fernando, and the doctor went out together to meet Beto, the sponsor. When they met, they explained the idea, and Beto was excited to join them as soon as he heard the details. So Fernando asked him, "Do you have the ability to sponsor the operation? We need a lot of things." Beto replied, "Honestly, I don't have cash, but I have a truck. I can sell it, and with its money, I can sponsor the operation." So Beto became the third main member of the gang. The doctor, as we said, was an unknown person and not a main member. Anyway, Fernando wanted a fourth member, someone to help with manual work who needed strength. The engineer Sebastian was going to be busy making tools and had some family problems. Beto was older and slower. So the doctor suggested the fourth member, who was Luis Solanes, nicknamed the Violent. Luis was a gang member and had a lot of experience in theft. He was imprisoned for 15 years in a strong prison. Luis the Violent was hot-blooded and always ready to resort to violence, but he was also smart and skilled in acting. He would play an important role in the operation later. Now the gang was complete. Fernando the leader, Sebastian the engineer, Beto the financier, and Luis the Violent. They began to research the details of the operation. They went down together to the tunnel and reviewed the accounts made by Fernando and Sebastian. The next step was to get more accurate accounts, so they needed bank building plans. Luis the Violent told them, "I'm going to bring you these plans." They asked how, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll get it." Indeed, after a few days, he brought the plans and put them in front of them. They didn't know how he got them. Did he spray the municipality's employees or steal them? No one knows. The important thing is that he brought them. After that, they calculated exactly where they needed to dig. They calculated the length of the tunnel and the angle needed and drew a detailed plan. They started to bring the tools they needed, an electric generator, digging tools, and big drills. They began to dig on the side of the tunnel, with someone always monitoring above to ensure the sound didn't reach outside. This digging process would take several months at least. Now they had to solve the next problem: thermal sensors, and the sensors that would be activated as soon as they dug into the treasure. Fernando, the leader, since he came from an artistic background, he started to draw a picture for his substitute. That will hide their temperature from the sensors. His substitute is made of sleeping bags that are used by campers and mountain climbers. And he bought a thermal camera, and he started to test it to see if it could catch his body temperature or not. But this idea, the substitute idea, was a little scary. There is still a possibility that this substitute will fail. Especially, they have to move a lot inside the treasure, and they will have tools and a lot of things that the sensors can catch. So the idea in general was not safe at all, and it has high risks. The leader, Fernando, was disappointed with this subject, and he was always thinking, what is the safest way they can enter the treasure? And suddenly, one day, a crazy idea came to his mind. All this time, he was focused on stealing the bank while it was closed, stealing the treasure from below without anyone seeing them. He was distanced from stealing the bank with weapons because the police will capture the place quickly. So the new idea that came to his mind is, why don't they combine the two ways together, the way to dig the tunnel and the way to steal the weapons? The idea that instead of using the tunnel to enter, they will use it to get out. And in this way, the alarm devices won't have any importance. The police will be already surrounded the place, but they will only surround the place from outside. They won't have any idea that the thieves will escape from underground. When Fernando thought of this idea, he went crazy and started searching on the internet to see if anyone did a similar operation before them, and he didn't find anyone. And he thought that the first person in the world thought of this idea in 1995. You will know that was the first person who thought of this idea. Anyway, since Fernando couldn't at the time to know about this operation from the internet, it means that it didn't reach the police in Argentina, and most likely they won't expect it. So when Fernando went and told the guys who came up with the idea, everyone was crazy and excited. So now they have to add the weapons to the equipment that they will need. So Beto, the owner, said that he will take care of the weapons since he was a gang member and he has experience in this field. But keep in mind something. The weapons that they will use will have something special that we won't reveal until the end of the story. So keep that in mind and watch the story until the end so you know what it is. The whole thing took about a year. During this year, they dug the tunnel and also they built a small dam. Inside the tunnel, the goal of this dam is to raise the water level to a certain level because they were planning to use small rubber boats inside the tunnel. They knew that when they go out with the loot, they won't be able to carry it on their feet and half of their body drowning in the water, in the tunnel water. Their movement will be very slow, so they had to use boats. So they built this dam to make the water level high inside the tunnel and allow the boats to move freely. Then they started looking for a way to escape. The initial idea was for them to escape toward the tunnel and get out of it. But then they said no. There's a big possibility that the police, as soon as they realize what happened, they will head to the tunnel and they might cut off their way. So they started studying the other way, which is the opposite direction to the tunnel. And they discovered that this direction is much better because there are hundreds of exits. These exits are the tunnels. Along the tunnel, these exits were located every 10 meters. So after they studied the opposite direction, they decided on a certain exit they will get out of, an exit about 200 meters from the bank's location. Then they decided to get a van and park it on top of this tunnel exit directly, and on the ground of this van, they will open an exit, and this exit will be directly on top of the tunnel exit. So they will get out of the tunnel directly inside the car without anyone seeing them. And Bito, the banker, brought a small van and parked it in his garage. So the gang were gathered in his garage to fix the van and open an exit on its ground. Suddenly, while they were working, his wife came in, Bito's wife, the banker's wife. So they all turned to Bito and asked him, "What is your wife doing here?" He said, "Calm down. It's nothing. I trust her. Believe me. Everything is fine. Don't worry." This was the first and only time that the gang members met Alicia Di Latolio, Bito's wife, the banker's wife. And keep this woman in mind because she will play an important role in the story later. Anyway, after the gang finished fixing the van, now they have to find the driver. And here came the role of the second unknown person, the person who was nicknamed the boy. This person, after his identity was known, like the doctor, and he was in charge of driving the car and waiting for them until they arrive. After finishing the operation, everything was almost ready. The only thing left is that they need a way to open the safe boxes inside the safe quickly, because inside the safe there are hundreds of boxes and they can't open them manually or they won't finish. It will take a long time. So the engineer Sebastian made a hydraulic device. They called it the push button. The function of this device is to break the safe boxes in just 7 seconds for each box, which means it will be an important performance in the operation. Finally, after all these preparations and efforts, everything was completely ready. As you can see, this is the tunnel which they will enter with the boats. And this is the tunnel which they dug, which leads to the bank above. And this is the bank's safe, which has the safe boxes, which is located in the basement of the bank and about 200 meters away. This is the tunnel's opening, which they will exit from. And above it is the van's car, which has an open floor, which they will use to escape. The gang decided that they will execute the operation on the 13th of January in 2006. Sebastian, the engineer, was the only one who entered from the tunnel's opening, and next to the tunnel's opening, which they dug, were the small rubber boats, which had the tools and on top of them, the cannons. After that, Sebastian went through the tunnel's opening until he reached the bank's wall, which is behind the safe, and he was waiting there until they gave him a signal. His colleagues, Captain Fernando and his daughter, the accountant, and Louis the Violent. The three of them, they met in front of the bank's door, and when they confirmed that everything was ready and everyone was in their position, they stormed the bank, and they took their weapons, and immediately they took the clients and the employees who were inside the bank as hostages, and they gave them a direct order to open their faces, and their faces to the ground. The guard, who was in the security room, closed the door on himself and informed the police immediately. It didn't take long, only a few minutes, until the police, which was close to the bank. Here, Fernando started to do a performance. He had planned for it before. He called it the Cuckoo's Plan. The idea was to take one of the hostages and get out of the bank's door and make himself as if he wanted to escape. But he got back to the bank quickly after he saw the police blocking the place. The goal of this move is to convince the police that they were planning to escape before they got to the place, and they even had a fake car in front of the bank as if it was their escape car. But because of the speed of the police's arrival and their response, their plan failed, and now they were trapped inside the bank. And indeed, the Cuckoo's Plan succeeded. When the operations leader got to the place, they informed the police, who were there, that the Cuckoos were trying to escape. But they got back to the bank quickly when they saw them blocking the place. So here, the operations leader assumed that the Cuckoos were trapped, and they had no other way out. The Cuckoos inside the bank were in control of the situation, except for one thing, which is the guard who locked himself. The door of the surveillance room. They had to get him out of this room in any way because he was in direct contact with the police. So if the guard saw them and they got out of the bank, he would immediately inform the police and their plan would fail. So they kept trying to negotiate with the guard, and the Cuckoo told him that nothing would happen to him. But if he didn't open the door, things would get worse. The guard stayed in his place and told them that he wouldn't give himself to them, no matter what he did. Here, the Cuckoo took one of the bank employees and put a gun on her head, and he started threatening the guard that if he didn't get out, he would kill her. The guard kept insisting on his position that he wouldn't give himself, but the employee, who was held by the Cuckoo, started to cry. And that was a very bad thing for the guard, because he was working with her, and he knew her. And this employee started to make the guard cry and tell him to get out, and told him that she wanted to see her daughter again. So the guard here couldn't ignore the situation, couldn't ignore her crying. And her cuckoo. So he told the cuckoo, "Okay, fine, I'll get out, but don't hurt anyone." So he opened the guard's door and put his gun on the table and handed himself to the cuckoo. Then the cuckoo started to open it from top to bottom and took a phone from it and told him to walk in front of it and accompanied him to the bank's door and told him to get out. So the guard was surprised and asked him to make sure. "Should I get out of the door?" So the cuckoo said, "Get out." So the guard got out of the door and he raised his hands and went to the police and the lost forces who were trapped in the place. The operations leader asked him about the situation inside. So the guard told him that he saw 3 armed thieves and that they were holding about 30 hostages inside the bank and told him that they took a phone from it. And through the bank's doors, the operations leader saw one of the thieves and he took the phone in his hand and pointed to them from outside as if he was telling them to call the phone, which is the guard's phone. At the same time, the leader Fernando contacted the engineer Sebastian, who was waiting in the tunnel outside the safe's wall. So Fernando told him to break through the wall. So Sebastian started digging from outside. And then he heard a sound, something moving on the other side. This sound was Fernando, and he moved the safe, which was exactly on the place where Sebastian was digging after the hole was opened. And Sebastian pulled his head out. Fernando took a deep breath because now he was sure that their tunnel was connected to the bank. At that moment, he was afraid that they were digging in the wrong place. Sebastian, the engineer, went inside the safe with his hydraulic tools, the pump, and he started using it to open the safe's lockers, which were huge. The plan was that at a certain time, they will be able to open the safe's lockers. They had set 2 hours for themselves. During those 2 hours, they had to open the biggest possible number of safe's lockers, and they were sure that they will be able to open around 400 safe's lockers during those 2 hours. So Sebastian the engineer and Fernando the leader stayed inside the safe to carry out the looting operation, while upstairs, Louis the violent and his daughter the accountant tried to control the bailiff and tried to arrest the police until the 2 hours, which they had set before. Louis the violent was the one who was holding the phone. And this person, like I told you, he had the talent of acting and deceiving. So he was able, in a weird way, to kill the police and make himself a celebrity, even in the media, which was covering the incident. First by first, they called him the one with the grey suit. Even the operation leader, when he contacted him, he was surprised how this person talked to him so calmly, as if nothing happened. The operation leader asked him, "What do you want?" Louis the violent told him, "Honestly, we wanted to steal the bank and we wanted to run away quickly. But you guys arrested us faster than we expected, so we don't want to hurt anyone. But now we don't know what to do." The operation leader was looking at Louis the violent with a look from the bank's door while he was talking to him on the phone, and he saw him sitting on the chair. And he was putting his leg on his leg. And he was calm, as if nothing happened. He was surprised how this man was so calm, and he knew that the man in front of him had experience and knowledge, and Louis cut his thoughts and told him, "Look, my friend, I just got out of Chica's car prison after spending 15 years in it, and this is not the first time I did a theft operation, so I know your procedures, so I advise you, don't try to play with me, because this thing can lead to something bad for the bank," the leader said. "Don't worry, we won't do anything, and we won't do anything bad, but you have to pay one of the bail every time, so you can show us your good intentions." So Louis replied, "We got you the guard. Why are you so greedy? Greed is not good, so don't ask for a bail. We decide when to pay the bail, okay? Goodbye." And he closed the phone in his face. In this way, Louis proved to the operation leader that he is the leader, and he made him think 1,000 times before he thought to do something stupid, and that's all they needed. They needed time. One of the funny things that happened, that Louis the violent and his daughter the financier, who had the bail, they discovered that an old woman between the bail, it was her birthday today. So they went to the small kitchen attached to the bank, and they brought her a small cake, and they were singing to her, "Happy birthday." And they let all the bail. They were on the ground. They sang to her with them, and in the end, they told her that they were going to give her a gift for her birthday, and that they were going to fire her. Honestly. And indeed, they took her out of the door and let her go. This story was mentioned in several sources, but out of her strangeness, even I couldn't believe it. In that case, the communication process continued between Louis the Violent and the operation leader. And every time Louis invented a story or something new to make them work on it, once upon a time, he even told them, call the financial lawyer to negotiate with him on the terms of submitting ourselves. And he gave them a phone number to one of the tenants who was with them on the basis that this is the lawyer's number. So when the police called on this number, which is supposed to be the lawyer's number, Louis responded to them himself and changed his voice and made himself a lawyer. And he was telling them that he was on his way to negotiate with them on the terms of submission. So this person was a strange case. He was able to kill the police very easily. He was able to kill them within the 2 hours that they needed and determined for the operation. When the 2 hours were over, unfortunately, Engineer Sebastian and Captain Fernando, they couldn't open the number that they were targeting from the boxes. They could only open 147 boxes. The hydraulic tools that they had, the pump, it had problems, and it was raising its temperature. So it was hard for it to work with the efficiency that they were expecting. But the loot that they were able to get, they never suspected it. It was a huge loot. That was enough for them. So they decided not to worry more and committed to the time that they determined for themselves. They didn't let their greed blind them. So Captain Fernando called Louis the Violent and told them that they were going to start the escape plan from the bank here. Louis was going to use the last game that they had hidden until the end against the police. So he called the operation leader and told him, look, we decided to surrender ourselves, but we know that we're going to stay at the checkpoint without a full meal for a long time. So before we surrender ourselves, we want a pizza. Bring us a large number, enough for us and enough for the hostages, so we can eat them with us. So the operation leader responded and told him, okay, we're going to get you a pizza. Louis still insisted on it, that they want an original Italian pizza, and gave them a name, a specific restaurant, a restaurant very far from the bank, to delay them for as long as possible. So the operation leader said, okay, we're going to get it from this restaurant. After this incident, Louis cut all the calls with the police, and he and his daughter, who were upstairs, they ordered the hostages to stay on the ground with their faces on the ground, without any movement. And they threatened them that if one of them moves, they're going to shoot him right away. During this time, Fernando and Sebastian, who were downstairs in the safe, gathered all the hostages in bags, and threw these bags through the hole they dug. Louis and his daughter, they joined them in the safe quickly, and before they left, they spread a small mattress on the ground and put their weapons on it. And we'll know at the end of the story why they did this move. After that, while they were leaving the hole in the wall, they brought back the safe, which was on the wall, to cover the hole again. And on top of that, they put something similar to a bomb on the hole. After that, they quickly went down to the small rubber boats, which were waiting for them downstairs. And they put the bags on one of the boats. And they put them on the other boat. And the two boats were tied with a rope. And they moved after that, directly along the tunnel. And on top of that was the van's car and its driver waiting for them. They put the bags from the hole in the van's floor, and the car was almost enough for them with the amount of big bags which they were carrying with them. And they moved after that, directly in the car, without anyone seeing them at all. After that, they headed to the safe house, which they had prepared before. And when they reached the house, they put the van in the garage, and they put down their bags. They took all the big bags that they were carrying with them. They drove straight to the car without anyone seeing them at all. Then they headed to the safe house that they had prepared before. And when they arrived at the house, they put the van in the garage and put down their loot bags. And the first thing they did was to turn on the TV to see the news and know what was happening and whether the police were following them or not. What's funny is that the police don't even have a bank yet. So the gang was watching TV as if they were watching a movie, waiting for the reaction to what would happen after they knew what they were doing. The operations leader, after the pizza that Lewis ordered, tried to contact Lewis more than once, but all these communications failed. So the leader decided that it was time to break in. So he ordered the Special Forces soldiers to break into the place while they were preparing for the armed clash. But when they broke into the place, they only found the loot bags that were lying on the ground. And because the thieves hid the loot bags in the wall before they left, the police couldn't figure out where they went or how they escaped. And seriously, they assumed that the thieves hid the loot bags in one way or another. And when they took the loot bags out of the bank, they were taking them out as if they were detainees until they knew their identities and made sure of them. And this scene that you see in front of you is real. Finally, after a while of searching and searching, they found the hole behind the wheelbarrow. But the problem was that there was something in front of them that looked like a bomb. So they had to call the explosives team to check it out, which they later found out that it was just a fake bomb. All of this was happening while the thieves were at home watching TV and celebrating their victory. After that, they immediately split the loot between them without even thinking about it. Because the calculation takes a long time. Their loot was a small mountain, a mountain full of money, gold, and jewels. The bank estimated that the amount of the loot reached $19 million. So this operation was classified as the biggest bank robbery operation in the history of Argentina. After they split the loot between them, the plan was that each one of them would go their own way and they would never see each other again. So each one of them took his share, got in his car and walked. Of course, they were all happy. But one of them would quickly ruin his happiness, and they would follow each other. This person was Beto, the banker. When Beto returned home, his wife and children were waiting for him on the edge of the cliff. Alicia, in particular, whom we mentioned before, knew about the operation. So she was excitedly waiting for her husband, waiting for their new wealth that would change their lives forever. So Beto celebrated that night with his wife and children. Time passed, and one day, when Beto returned home with his friends, he noticed that one of the loot bags that he had hidden in his house was nowhere to be found. And when he opened the bag, he saw that a large amount of money was hidden in it. So he went to his wife, Alicia, and asked her, "Tell me, did you take any of this money?" So she replied, "Yes, I took 5 or 6 small bags with me. Keep in mind that 5 small bags were worth about $300,000. So Beto told her, "We're trying to avoid the eye of the beholder. How can you take such a large amount of money without telling me? You'll embarrass us." That's when they started fighting, and Beto asked her to return the money she had taken. So she refused, and they started fighting. In the end, Beto took his loot and the bags he had in his house and decided to hide them somewhere else. He never expected that his wife would hate him to the point that right after he left the house, she went to the police station and reported him. Maybe she even thought that he was cheating on her with another woman, and she thought that he took the money to go to this secret lover and leave them. So imagine, jealousy was the reason. Jealousy is not even a thing. Because Beto didn't have a lover, nor did they feel sad. On the contrary, he loved his family and it's impossible for him to go somewhere without them. There are many details about the events that happened after that, but we won't mention them in detail because it's not important. In short, Beto was arrested, and after his arrest, he got his ID and refused to reveal his co-worker's ID. But with his wife's help and some other evidences, like tracking the phones, they were able to find out the identities of the 4 people who carried out the operation. And they were released, and all of their arrest warrants were issued. Although each of them went in a different direction, in the end, they were all caught. Imagine, for example, Fernando, the leader. He was hiding in a tent in a remote place, but the National Guard's patrols were able to catch him. And Luis, the violent one, he left all of Argentina and went to Uruguay, which is his home country, but even there, he was caught. And Sebastian, the engineer, was the easiest one among them. They caught him, and he was in his house. So all 4 of them were caught and they were tried. The strange thing is that most of the loot wasn't retrieved. The loot was hidden in difficult places and they refused to admit where it was. And in the end, they were sentenced to 9 to 15 years in prison, and no one was able to complete his sentence. On the contrary, they were all released for a short period of time for good behavior. Fernando and Sebastian, each of them spent about 2 years in prison and that's it. And then they were released and put in a forced confinement for 2 years in their homes. As for Beto and Luis, because they were close friends, they were in prison for a longer period of time. Luis spent about 6 years in prison, and Beto spent 8 years in prison. It was a shorter period of time than most of the sentences they were sentenced to, which was actually not that long. So now the question is it possible for a $1 million stolen weapon to be its reward? How are the rules so weak? The main reason was the weapons they used. Do you remember when I told you that their weapons had something special in them? And do you remember when I told you that when they got out of the bank, they put their weapons on a carpet? The reason was because their weapons were fake. They weren't real weapons. Imagine being in prison and doing a huge operation like this, and you need a lot of money, and the police and special forces are complicated with fake weapons. Of course, the reason is to get caught, and that's what really happened. The sentence for stealing a weapon is very different from stealing an unarmed weapon, and that's what led to the end of the light sentences and early release. But the strange thing is, like I said, most of the money wasn't recovered. So I don't know. Maybe there was a secret deal they made with the authorities to get back a large part of the money in exchange for an early release. Because it would be very strange if they were released like this, without a reward. The only possibility left is that there's a bribery involved. But of course, all of this is just conclusions. God knows what happened behind the scenes. The bank customers were compensated by the bank and insurance companies. There's a drama movie about this issue, and there's also a documentary. In the documentary, all 4 of them are proud of their normal operation, and they seem to be living a comfortable life so far. I honestly don't know what happened to the money. Anyway, we're done here. We've reached the end of our story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel and activate the bell button.